Alrighty, everybody, it is time to talk about basic selected contract law concepts. But these basic concepts should be the same wherever we go. So, do we remember what makes a contract? What are some of the essential elements? What is it? What is a contract anyway? What is it? What's the definition? A deliberate agreement. And then we think and two parties or more. Good. All right. There's something every contract has to have, or it's not a contract, it's a favor. There needs to be money on the line or something of value, because it's not just cash. It can be a service. It can be anything of value as long as the parties see value in it. And then, of course, it is going to be to do or not do an act. Signatures, written documents, these are actually things that are beyond the requirements of a contract. They are the things that we as real estate brokers seek, because when we make binding contracts in real estate, most of our binding contracts are going to have to be in writing from the beginning in order to be enforceable in a courtroom. But not every contract has to be in writing in order to be enforceable. In fact, not every contract even has to be expressed to be enforceable. So it's important that we remember, distilled down to its essential elements, what makes a contract is not the document it's written on, but it is the agreement between the parties to do or not do a legal act with the support of something of value on the line. As I said before, it doesn't even have to be out loud. Our contracts in real estate should always be expressed. Should always be expressed, as in we express the terms of the agreement. Does express mean it has to be in writing? Express can be as simple as we're expressing it by having a conversation. This is a dramatic reenactment of me and my neighbor Rob. As you can see, I hired good-looking actors. Neither one of us is that good-looking. Me and my neighbor Rob are having a conversation about my lawn. My neighbor Rob is a true green lawn salesman. His lawn is immaculate. I believe in feeding the bees, right? So I have the natural lawn. I hear this is big in California right now. This is a nice way of saying I've let my lawn go to the weeds. Rob comes over and he goes, Catherine, 30 minutes a week, and I could take your lawn from looking like that to looking like my lawn. And I'm like, Rob, I don't care. And Rob goes, 30 minutes a week, and I could make this happen for you. And I said, well, Rob, what would that cost me? And he goes, $40, Catherine, $40 for 30 minutes a week, and I can turn turn your lawn around. I say, okay, Rob, do it. This is now an express agreement, a mutual agreement. We've considered it. We're deliberately making it. We have something of value on the line for both of us. He's got $40 a week. I'm going to have a beautiful lawn. To the best of my knowledge, we've got a contract, right? If we show up, if he does not show up when he's supposed to show up, I can carry him to court. And the judge will listen and decide. As long as there are no other laws laying down over the top of this agreement between us. Implied contracts are not express contracts. Implied contracts are what? Implied contracts are contracts of action. We're men of action, not men of words. We don't need to talk about the fact that you're my client now. You are. Come with me. I hit you over the head. I drag you by the hair. You're my client now. Let's say Rob and I's conversation went very differently. This is actually what Rob looks like. Rob and I's conversation went very differently that day. I actually went like this, Catherine, your lawn. And I went, uh-huh. It would be so easy to fix. I don't care, Rob. And then he could hear the door slamming as I went back inside. And then I was sitting here one day teaching my class and I heard this noise outside in my yard. And when it was break time, I went and looked and Rob is out in my front yard aerating my yard. So what the hell, Rob? So after that, class ends, I walk across and I go over to Rob's house and I bang on his door and I hand him $40. And then I walk away. And the next week I'm teaching my class and I'll be gosh darned if Rob isn't out there fertilizing my lawn. So at the end of class, I walk over and I hand him $40. How long do you think this will have to go on before a judge will hear it in court? Implied contracts are enforceable contracts. They are enforceable, which means a judge will hear about it. And if a judge hears you've done this in real estate, is that going to be okay? You know, Statute of Frauds requires this to be in writing to be enforceable. The Real Estate Commission says it needs to be in writing to be enforceable. But you did it because you started advising them like you were their agent. And when they responded to you as though you were their agent, like they were your client, you formed a binding, illegally formed agency relationship. So it is super important that we remember contracts are not the documents they're written on. They're the agreement between the parties. And if we don't have that agreement in writing, then I'm not just crossing my fingers here. You're looking at just one of those fingers, and that's how you are. You know what I mean? You hearing me there? You are really and truly in trouble. When contracts are formed without words, how are they formed? Bilateral contracts are contracts where we have a promise on both sides. This is, I don't know if you remember doing bilateral versus unilateral and pre-licensing, but this tends to be the hardest thing to wrap our heads around. Because the issue with contracts is they all have to have something of value on the line. We very often get consideration confused with the promise, what it is that makes this lateral. So allow me to help you identify the important word here. The important word in bilateral is later. It's happening later. When we have a bilateral contract, we have parties agreeing to do something later. Both parties later. If it's unilateral, how many people will agree to do something later? Just one, right? Bi is 2, uni is 1. We learned that from cycling. So a bilateral contract, both parties agree to do something later. Unilateral contract, only one party is going to do something later, but there's still consideration on the line. So if we have a wanted poster, if we are hunting down our bounty, there is this horrible, bad real estate agent out there, and if we can just hunt him down and bring him to the commission first, we'll be rewarded $1 million for bringing in the bad agent. The real estate commission is making the promise of the $1 million. Who is promising to bring in the rogue agent? Did I promise? Did you call him up and go, don't give that $1 million to anybody else. I'm bringing him in. We make no promise on the other side of this contract. In this case, there is an offer to everyone. and anyone can answer it. It's not just an offer, though. This is a binding contract, because if I show up with that rogue agent at the commission and they go, we've changed our minds, that's not going to work. No, I didn't go through all of this and have to put them up at the Motel 6 overnight because I captured them and have to stay up all night to make sure they didn't sneak out so that you could go, we've changed our minds. I want my $1 million. So just because nobody promised to bring it in, it's still a binding agreement if we do. As long as the promise is out there, it takes anybody to respond to it. But there's only one promise to do something later, and that's coming from the commission. If nobody responds, nobody broke a promise. Another potential form of a unilateral contract is one where there is a promise out there that somebody may or may not choose to act on. Like, for instance, a right of first refusal. If I have a right of first refusal on a piece of property, then somebody has promised me that I get to make an offer on that property. I get to match an offer that was out there. If they sell their property, do I ever have to make an offer if I have a right of first refusal? No. If I have a right of first refusal, I'd make no promises myself. I simply take a promise from somebody else. How do I ensure that my promise is enforceable? They're going to make me pay an option fee right now. All righty, answer me this, everybody. Jody places an ad on Craigslist offering $20 to anyone who can produce a mint condition garbage pail card she's been on the hunt for. Gary comes along a month later and produces the card, but Jody refuses to pay. Is this unilateral or bilateral?
Unilateral.
It is. Who made the promise?
Jody.
Jody. And what happens if Jody decides not to, or if Jody's refused to pay? What can Gary do?
You can sue her.
Sue her. Alrighty, so yes, this is an enforceable contract, a unilateral contract. And if we end up in a court of law, Gary has the right to get his money. Express or implied?
Express.
Where was it expressed?
She put it in Craigslist.
That's right. It's on Craigslist. So we have a fully expressed unilateral contract here supported by consideration. This is something we can go out there and get our money back for. This happens all the time. If you put a sign out that says you want somebody to send Missy the cat back to you, and you'll give them $200 for bringing you your cat back, and then you figure out Missy will come back on her own, and you don't take the sign down, you still owe people $200 every time they bring Missy back for you. If you don't want to pay out for Missy, take the signs down. Executed or executory? What does it mean if it's executed? It all depends on what it is. If we're talking about the offer, we're talking about it getting signed, right? So if we're at the point of offer to contract, executed means signed. If we're at the point of completing the contract and we ask if it's been executed, that means it's settled, performed. Executory means it's ready to be signed or ready to be performed. It's very important when we're working with other brokers that we remember language matters. If you reach out to somebody and they say, we have an agreement or we have a deal, that is empty language that means absolutely nothing. You respond back Do we have an executed contract? Do we have a signed agreement? Is there a signature? Because guys, if it's still executory, we don't have a deal. We don't have a contract. Don't fall for empty language. Agents use that to string each other along while they're waiting for a better deal to come through. So if somebody says to you, we've got a deal, you say, do we have a signed agreement? And if they say, yes, we have a signed offer to purchase and contract, now you can say, I will report that you have told me it is signed. And I'm going to put that in a text or an email, even if we had that conversation on the phone or in person, because I am not going to my client saying we have a deal until I have something in writing from the other side saying it's been signed. Don't fall for empty language. Is it valid? Is it voidable, or is it void? These are questions for a judge. We'll never have to determine if it's valid, voidable, or void. And if we ever do attempt to determine if it's valid, voidable, or void, we may be accused of practicing law without a license. So it is important to remember this is a judge's purview. But it is always important for us to be aware if it's possible that our contract might be missing an essential element. As long as our contracts have all the essential elements, we know we've got valid contracts. There will never be a question of law or doubt that it is valid. We will get to keep our compensation every time, which is good because I usually have already spent it. If it's missing a single element, void. If it is a void contract, then that means even if it's already been performed, we may have to give our compensation back. Even if it happened years ago, they may be coming to us with a letter being like, it turns out that wasn't quite true. So you know that $12,000 you got, we're going to need that back. If it's voidable, you don't know. You don't know. It's Schrodinger's cat. You don't know if there's a cat in that room or not until you open the door. You don't know if this contract is valid or void until a party to the contract decides to make it so. So that is the most important thing for you to pay attention to. When could it potentially be voidable so that I can avoid those situations? Valid contracts, as I said, contain all the essential elements. And when a contract is valid, they'll hear it in a courtroom. Remember, essential elements do not include written unless there's another law that says so. Look, anytime puppies or children want to get into the camera, I'm down with it. Okay, they make me happy. So puppies, cats. I haven't been down with the ball pythons yet, but you never know. We could change. I don't even know if they're still legal in North Carolina. Voidable contracts, as I said, are when contracts can be avoided, but that's going to be a decision made by a party to the contract or by law, because the law said it is going to be the right of the party to the contract to determine that the contract is voidable, that they shouldn't be in it. But it may take the law to come around behind him and confirm that for all the parties. Void contracts are unenforceable from the beginning. Do you know why? It's missing that essential element. There is an element it's missing. So what are the essential elements to a contract? We know the definition for a contract is a deliberate agreement among competent parties to do or not do an act supported by consideration. So the essential elements follow right in line with that. A mutual assent, deliberate agreement between competent parties, the capacity of the parties to do or not do a legal act, lawful objective, supported by something of value, consideration. These are the essential elements of a contract. When I was taught there were 5 of them. I was taught reality of consent was an essential element. John, do you remember all the way back then when you were, yeah, right? We had 5 of them. And now I'm being told there were 4. So it's a refining process that's been happening for years. And they went, no, reality of consent is not an essential element. It is something that supports mutual assent and capacity. So the essential elements are mutual assent, capacity of the parties, lawful, objective, and consideration. And this is it. What are the essential elements of a contract? As simple as that. So now that we know, we got to go back in and make sure we know what each of these things is. Mutual assent, ladies and gentlemen, is the deliberate agreement among parties, an intention to show a meeting of the minds. We create this mutual assent, or I should say, we know we have mutual assent, pardon me, by showing an intention to contract, careful consideration of terms, and we do this through the process of offer and acceptance. Now, offer and acceptance has traditionally been a back and forth, right? A tennis match, if you will, a volley of terms and considerations across the net. The net being the separation, the agents between those buyer and sellers. Mutual assent had an offer and a counteroffer. And that process of offer and counteroffer is vital for mutual assent, because what it shows, and this is important that you watch this video, what it shows is that before we pull the trigger, we think through what we're about to do. As this man clearly did not. Whoopsie daisy. So don't make the mistake of thinking that if we counteroffer, we're gonna kill every deal. Though it is true that when we counteroffer, we kill the offer on the table. We need counteroffers because they show that process of
Negotiation.
yeah, Maria, exactly, of mutual assent, of the desire to have that meeting of the minds. So we need that. But we're terrified of it at the same time as an industry right now, because when we counter, we kill. And we are afraid for some reason to kill, because we believe that if we kill it, they will take the next train riding by. And it's interesting that we seem to be communicating that to the sellers as well as to the buyers. I understand telling the buyers that you don't want to make a low offer. I get that. But why are we not counseling our sellers to counter back with their ideal terms? We have gotten so gun shy in the industry that we're getting a lot of buyers out there who are pulling the trigger, who have not thought it through. And we got to stop that, because they're doing way more damage than having to replace the hood of their car. If we do have a counteroffer, remember, every modification is a rejection. Do you know what I like how I like to refer to this? I like to refer to this as killing this with our butts. That's right. Every time we put our butt in the middle of it, we kill it. We love your offer, but we just want this instead. As soon as I give you an alternative term, I've killed the offer you gave me and presented a counter offer. The offerer has now become the offeree. And I can't tell you who started out as whom, because anybody can offer to begin with. So we have to remember the offerer is the person making the offer, and the offeree is the person accepting or rejecting that offer. These can be the buyer or the seller, depending on who started the process. And it flips around depending on where we are. If we don't counter, then our other options are simply to reject or to accept. Accepting the offer means communicating. Signing is not acceptance. Communication is. And communication to the agent is communication to the principal. So we have to remember that when we sign it, we're not done. If a tree falls in the forest and no one's there to hear it, does it make a sound? If an offer is signed and no one is there to receive it, does it make a binding contract? I'm afraid not. We must communicate that it has been accepted in order to make it so. If the buyer accepts and they get hit by a bus and their contract goes up in fiery flames and nobody is there to receive it, it didn't happen. However, if we can communicate that acceptance while they're being hit by the bus, then that buyer's heirs are bound, baby. Communication equals acceptance. So we've got to communicate to the agent, if there is one, as soon as we possibly can in order to form the effective date. On our contract, you will see the effective date is not the date of the last signature. It's the date that it was communicated. And if that's not the same date, that could cause issues for both parties as we try to determine our settlement date if we did something like 30 days from effective date in our initial agreement. Right? So keeping in mind, communication is everything. Exactly who do I need to communicate to? That depends on what kind of agency we're involved in. If this is a co-brokered sale, you need to get all the way back to the agent of the offering party. The agent of the offering party. If it's the buyer, then it's the selling agent. And if it's the seller, then it's the listing agent that it needs to get back to. Who's the agent in North Carolina?
The broker, the agency we work for.
That's right, right? The company. I'm not a party to the contract, my company is. I'm not the agent, my company is. Which means, which agent do I need to get back to in a co-brokered sale?
Just anybody in the agency.
Any agent in the firm. Oh, if I'm afraid that the agent that I'm trying to get to is trying to tell me that they don't want to make that offer, don't call that agent. Call a different agent. You don't have to get this to the specific agent who made the listing or the offer. You have to get it back to an agent in their firm. So just get it back to an agent in their firm. Call the person at the front desk. Find out if they're an agent. If they're not, get an agent on the phone. Hi, I'm so-and-so, and we are accepting this offer. If it's a customer, do they have an agent? No. So who will we have to communicate acceptance to if it's a customer?
The customer.
The customer themselves. You can't stop. There is no agent to stop at. You must find that buyer or seller who made the offer and let them know it has been accepted. If we're in traditional dual agency, when is it communicated?
Whichever side is the last side to sign, once their representation knows, the whole agency knows.
Perfect. I'm giving you that again. There is no opportunity in traditional dual agency for communication to cross hairs here, except for them to be confused as to how that might work. So it's important that they understand, once it's signed, it is communicated. You cannot withdraw that acceptance in dual agency. Buyers and sellers must get that. That must be made clear to them, because a lot of buyers in other situations, in fact, in any other situation, we would need to communicate to somebody else. So they need to understand when they sign and accept that offer, that it will be binding from the moment they sign it in traditional dual agency. There will be absolutely no opportunity for them to rescind and not be in breach. Everybody good with that? Make sure your clients know, because that could be very confusing for them if they go, oh, I've changed my mind. And you go, well, you can't. But you're still sitting in front of me. Yeah, but I just saw you sign it. Okay, because in any other situation, we could stop that process before we get to the other side. Because whom do I need to speak to in designated dual agency? Remember, designated dual agency is where a specific agent has been assigned to each individual party. Right, here we go. This time with designated dual agency, you have to communicate it back to the other side. So the individual agent this time. So it should actually say not just selling or listing, but it should say individual in there. And I am not trying to write that out. So I'm going to stop right there with individual. So the individual selling or listing agent this time, the individual representative. Because in the case of designated dual agency, remember, there is supposed to be a wall of confidentiality that exists inside your firm that stops information from just being known in sort of a hive mind. So when we practice traditional dual agency, the attitude is, we all know everything about all of our clients. That's how we can offer the best service to them. Of course, we won't share any of it with them. In designated dual agency, we're going to designate somebody to represent each side, and they're going to get the full fiduciary duty and all of the coaching that they had in exclusive agency. But they can only have that if they don't know anything about the other side and they don't have access to information about the other side, which means that we can't do that once any agent knows, every agent knows collective hive mind. For that particular designated agent, we're going to have to go and make sure they specifically are aware it's been accepted. So the only time we have to get back to the specific individual agent is when we are in designated dual agency. In traditional dual agency, as soon as one agent knows, we all know. In co-brokered sales with other firms, as soon as any agent in that firm knows, it's done. And when there's a customer out there, we have to tell the customer. Everybody okay with this? Questions, comments, or concerns? Of course, how we communicate is also up to us, and also vitally important. We could potentially communicate by oral means, by personal delivery. We could put it in the mail. We could deliver it via electronic means, email or texts or something else to the agent. And that should not really say seller. That should say offer or. One day I'll fix that instead of just scratching through it every time and saying that should say offer or. say it's going to happen. It could happen today since we're so close to break time. I'm not making promises though, because I've learned not to make promises. Terrible with follow through. These are the different ways we can communicate, but there are advantages and disadvantages to each of these. So let's talk about what happens when we communicate by these various methods. When we communicate by oral or personal delivery, it is considered communicated when it has been heard or received by the agent of the offering party. When we put it in the mailbox, it is delivered from the very moment we drop it in there. And when we deliver things by electronic means, it is delivered at the time that it is received. Not at the time that I sent it, but at the time they received it. Anybody ever sent a text message that didn't get into somebody's texts until like 3 days later? I once received a text message 6 months after it was sent. You don't want that to happen to your contract. So if you're sending it by text, it's not when you sent it, it's when they receive it. If you send it by email, it's not when you send it, not when it goes out of your email inbox, but when it arrives in theirs. Not when they opened it, but when they received it. And this is very important. And when we come back from break, we'll talk about why.